Here we are. Well, I love it when a plan comes together. What do you think of this then? It's a little different from Idea Summit, but really what we're trying to do with this is do better than Idea Summit. In some ways, this is better because you don't need to travel. And it's better because it doesn't take, a week's worth of your working time away. So I hope you'll grow to enjoy this format even more than the summits. But this is very different from the summits because we're going to do Idea and eventually invite our friends over from OSCA, which is the Online Social Community Association, which is entirely fledgling at this stage. So couple of things for housekeeping. Number one, we're not doing Q&A today, just so that we have a nice quick flow. So if you have questions, please put them in the general chat area, which you'll see over to the right. They're not going to answer the questions on video, but I've asked the presenters to stick around after their presentations and have a go at answering your questions in text. The other thing is, once we go to the presentation mode with the screens, you'll see the picture of the person presenting the video and also the presentation. That's going to look rather small. So you'll see on the top right, there's the little arrows. Click on that and that will then make the presentation full screen. If you want to see it full screen, you'll be able to see all the details. You will lose the image of the presenter, but at least you'll be able to see the presentation as well and hear the presenter. If you've got any questions, please let me know. I'm going to hang out in the general chat as well. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very first ever presenter, who is Professor Sheena Iyengar, who is referred, thank you very much, from Zachary Brown, who we had a long chat and he said, well, you need to have Professor Iyengar. And he's absolutely right for one very special reason. If you think about our industry, we help people with their decisions. We help them choose someone that they might perhaps fall in love with. We help them choose someone that they might perhaps want to spend a lot of time with, or at least deepen their relationships with. So we're really in charge of a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with guiding those decisions. So we really maybe we could use some help as we help people, our users, with those decisions. And so who would be the most qualified person to possibly give us advice on choosing? Well, it would be nice if we could find the person who wrote the book on choosing. Really, it's an art more than a science. It's the art of choosing that we need some assistance with, and that is exactly the title of the book that Professor Iyengar wrote, The Art of Choosing. And hopefully she can help us think big. And actually, that's the title of her next book. Maybe she'll mention that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the baton over to Professor Iyengar. Professor, if you'd like to put on your cam and mic and join us. And I'm going to turn mine off and leave you to it. All right. Thank you very much.
Hi, can everybody see me? Hopefully you can. So thank you for such a warm introduction. It's wonderful to be here. I've actually never spoke at a dating conference before. So just a quick housekeeping matter. I'm going to talk to you about choice. I'm joined here by my assistant, Ali, who's going to run the slides. And since I am blind, know that the questions and comments that you put in the chat box will be read to me by Ali. So don't get freaked out if you hear a different voice than mine. So with that, let me begin by talking to you about choice. And so as Mark just mentioned, I wrote a book called The Art of Choosing, and I've essentially spent about 3 decades now looking at why do we want choice, and what are the things that affect how and what we choose, and what are some things we can do to choose better. Now, today I'm going to talk about a very particular phenomenon that is relevant to the dating market. And so I'm going to start by asking you a question, and I'm going to ask that you put the answer in the chat box. So my first question to you is, in a typical week in your life, how many choices do you make? So just put numbers in the chat box. So in a typical week, how many choices do you make?
Thousands, 1,000, 500 or more, 200, 1,000, 5,000. My wife makes all of mine.
Oh, I love that one.
Much more than I think. So many.
Okay, beautiful. So suffice it to say, that
million.
suffice it to say that we live in a world where there is an explosion of choice happening. And that really began, it started to happen in the 70s, but in the last 50 years, that explosion has skyrocketed. So just to give you a sense of the scale, in the 1970s, the average grocery store in the United States had about 9,000 products in it. Today, the average grocery store has over 40,000 products. Today, the average Walmart has about 4 million products and growing with their recent expansion to more and more e-commerce. Amazon has upwards of 300 million products in it. And if you're worried that COVID has been destroying the number of choices you have, you are absolutely wrong. There are 200 different streaming sites now available to you, and if you go on Apple, just look at their podcasts and apps, etc. They have 2.2 million and counting. It is not just that we live in a world where we have a lot of choice. We live in a world where we have a lot of information. So on average, we check our phones now every day about 150 times. We generate, as in terms of the globe, about 2.5 quintillion bits of information per day. And if you look at the amount of information coming at us subconsciously, consciously, it is estimated that it's about the equivalent of reading about 174 newspapers. So back in the 1990s, long before this explosion had really gone beyond the tipping point, I started to wonder about what are the consequences of offering people more and more choice. And I didn't know that I was at the tipping point at the time. And so I ran a study at that time that first looked at this question of how do people respond as the number of choices proliferate. I was a PhD student at Stanford University at the time, and I used to frequent this upscale grocery store called Draeger's. Now, at that time, that store was really unique. Today, it's almost passé. This store offered people lots and lots of variety. It was almost like going to an amusement park. They had over 250 types of mustards, vinegars, mayonnaises, over 500 different types of fruits and vegetables, over 75 different types of extra virgin olive oil. And so I used to like going to this store. It was fun. But I never bought anything. I would go over to the local Safeway. Now, admittedly, I was a poor PhD student, but still. And so what happened was, after much discussion with the store manager, we decided to do what is today been dubbed as the famous JAM study. And some of you might have heard about it. And although it doesn't have to do with dating, I want to describe this study and one other study to give you a sense of some of the underlying phenomenon that happen when people are confronted by a lot of choice. So at that time, Draeger's had about 348 different types of jam in their aisle. And what we did was we picked one brand of jam called Wilkin & Sons, the Queen of England's jam, and we set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of this store. And we put out either 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to stop and sample some jam? Second, in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam? And here's what we found. People were more likely to stop when there were 24 on display, about 60%, than when there were 6 on display, about 40%. And even though those numbers seemingly equal 100%, they're actually 2 entirely different populations. Then we looked at buying behavior. So everybody who stopped at the tasting booth was given a coupon, giving them $1 off if they bought a jar of jam. And what we found was that we saw the opposite effect when it came down to buying behavior. Of the people who stopped when there were 24 on display, only 3% of them bought a jar of jam. Whereas of the people who stopped when there were 6 on display, 30% of them bought a jar of jam. Now, if you do the math, people were actually at least 6 times more likely to buy a jar of jam when they saw less than when they saw more. That was the first documentation that although people are initially more attracted to having a larger display of option when it comes down to making a choice, they're more likely to make a choice when they see less than when they see more. Now I'm going to show you one other study that doesn't have to do with dating that I think also further explicates the phenomenon that goes on, particularly when you're talking about more subjective choice-making experiences. So now let's take the case of choosing chocolate, right? We all love chocolate. It's really delicious. And it's one of the few things I can serve to undergraduate students who are not of age, which is still a nice sensual experience. So can't get away with serving them beer. So we brought students into the laboratory where they either encountered 6 different delicious flavors of Godiva chocolate or 30 different flavors of Godiva chocolate. And they have a really simple task. Just choose one and eat it. No questions asked, just choose one and you can eat it. And then when you're done, just tell me how you liked it. And as you're walking out the door, I'll either pay you for what you just did for me, or I'll give you a box of free chocolate. And so what happens? It turns out, so because we were able to do 6 versus 30, we kept rotating which 6 out of those 30. And what we observed was that literally the same chocolate, if selected from 6, was perceived as more delicious than if it was selected from 30. Not only that, if they perceived it as more delicious, they were more likely to pick a box of chocolate as their final compensation than money. Now, in later studies, what we also found was that if you're shown 6 and you know that that 6 came out of a selection of 30, so you know that I constrained your choice set for you, well, then the positive effects of giving you 6 gets a bit more moderated. It's more muted. I'm less satisfied with the one I've chosen because I keep wondering, well, what if I'd seen the whole selection? If I ask you to tell me how many of the 30 you want to see, most people do not say they want to see 30. They know they can't handle 30. And on average, they will pick somewhere between about 15 and 18 out of those 30. But they're still less satisfied than if they're just choosing from a set of 6 when they know that that set of 6 is the complete set. Now, these studies I'm describing to you were done almost 20 years ago. And since then, there has been thousands of studies done, not just by me, but by many other people that have gone on to look at the effects of offering people more and more choice. And in fact, many industry practices have been changed as a function of these findings. Whether you're looking at consumer choices, investment choices, the market has definitely been affected, and I'll tell you later about the dating studies, and even more recent, very serious, substantial choices like life and death. There are essentially 4 consequences to offering people more and more choice. First, the more choices people have, the less likely they are to make a choice. They choose not to choose, they procrastinate, they go for the default. Second, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to choose suboptimally. They make errors. You see a lot of performance decrements happen as people get flustered and experience cognitive overload. Third, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to exhibit inconsistent preferences, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. Fourth, the more choices they have, the more likely they are to be less satisfied with whatever they've chosen. And it turns out that even when you know that you've objectively chosen better or the best in that choice set, just the idea that there might be something else that you didn't come across that's better, people start to fixate on that, and that increases regret. So those are the 4 consequences. Now I want to take a close look at what has been the evolution of choice when you think about the dating market. Now, in 1932, there was actually a very famous study done looking at dating and love. And what they observed was that if you took a sample of over 5,000 people living in the city of Philadelphia, what you observe is over 40% of the marriages took place amongst people that lived within basically a 20-block radius of one another. Now think about that, because it's kind of like being able to choose from a chocolate set of 6. Sure, they know their choice set is constrained, but they also know how well they did on that choosing exercise, because they know approximately what the market sort of feels like for them and how well they did. Did I get the best in my general geographic area? And there's obviously, as a function of them living nearby, there's probably shared interests, shared values that they're naturally matching on. So obviously, our geographic ability to navigate has grown exponentially. Now let's look at marriage. 1950s, people were getting married pretty young, 20s. By 2014, most recent numbers, we're now up to maybe an average of 27 years old. In urban environments, that goes up even higher. Say New York City, you're in your 30s. Now, Match.com started back in 1995. That was the first time you had an online dating site. And in fact, I was at Stanford when it launched in Silicon Valley, and knew quite a few people that actually were amongst the first users. Today, of course, the industry equals at least around $3 billion, if not more. And in the United States, when you look at the proliferation of the kinds of dating apps that exist today, it is incredible. We are way past Match.com, eHarmony, OkCupid, Tinder. I mean, there are so many different niche dating apps. So much so that it is a real proliferation of choice. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of proliferation that we're seeing. So we're seeing 2 types of proliferation happening in the dating market. And forgive me if I don't cover every single one of the different dating apps, because you know that in the United States, we have about 2,500, and estimated at least 2,500 in the rest of the globe. So there's no way I can capture all that. But essentially, you have 2 types of variations that are happening in the dating market. And I would put them into 2 buckets. So first, you have a lot of variation happening in choice menus. So on the one hand, you have things like Match.com, eHarmony, etc., League, Coffee Meets Bagel, where you're giving people a small choice set, a lot of information per choice, more information per profile. Then on the other hand, you have Tinder. Lots of choice, 1 information bit, 1 or 2 information bits per choice, right? So remember how I said there was a proliferation happening, choice and information, and those are obviously coupled. What else are we seeing? Well, we're seeing the advent of niche. And you have a lot of different niches. I mean, it's incredible to consider all the different niches, whether it's women trying to find men with beards, farmers only, cat lovers, gluten-free, different sorts of passions. I mean, I don't even think I could possibly cover all the different niches. And so what are we actually seeing? What you're seeing is a recognition in the dating marketplace that we should try to curate choice, that perhaps less is more. So let's try to make the choosing environment for people a bit easier. And how we're going to do that? We're going to go for some form of less is more and make it fun. And I would bucket it into two kinds of choosing experiences, which is one that goes for quantity, right? Quantity of choice, less information bit per choice, versus quality. I'm going to give you less choice, more information per option. So that gives us a sense of what the marketplace looks like right now. And what are the consequences of this marketplace? Well, you have two kinds of consequences happening. On the one hand, you are seeing far more users than you used to have. So amongst the homosexuals, you're seeing about 70% engagement with online dating. When you come to heterosexuals, though, it's climbing upward for sure. It's somewhere in the 30s now, and like maybe 35% of heterosexuals are using online dating. So there's obviously more potential there for market. And I'm going to get to it a little bit as to what are some of the concerns that customers have when they're dealing with dating choosing today. So that's a quick snapshot of where we've come in the dating arena. Now I'm going to show you what some of the science has to say about how people are making choices in this world of a lot of choice. So following the studies that I did on jam and chocolate, one of the early studies that I did on choice actually was in dating. Now, this is before dating became a real thing. I was one of the scientists that created the speed dating events. I didn't know it was going to become a thing, a product. And so any of you who've read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, there is a chapter dedicated to the study I'm about to describe to you. And this study ultimately led to about 3 different academic papers at that time. And I'm going to show you the study and the findings. And I think you'll find them interesting because this happened before the real explosion in dating apps. And so we set up a speed dating event in Upper West Side, here right by Columbia campus. And this was part of a study. And what happened was beforehand, people were asked, what are you looking for in a mate? And they had to answer lots of different questions like, I'm looking for somebody who's funny, who's ambitious, who's intelligent. They had to indicate on each of these how important was these things to them. Then they arrive at the event, right? And because I'm a scientist, I can sort of play with them. And so I invited either 10 men, 10 women, or 20 men, 20 women. I apologize. This is before we got sophisticated, so this was purely heterosexual dating. And so we had 10 and 10, or 20 and 20. And then during the event itself, they had a 4-minute date. So you met, you had a 4-minute date, then you filled out a survey and you rated this person on those very same attributes. How funny, how attractive, how ambitious, how intelligent, how sincere, how much do I like this person overall? Do I feel like I have shared interests with this person? How likely is this person to say yes to me? Yes or no? Do I ever want to see this person again? In the event that 2 people said yes, they were given each other's email address, and you have a match. Okay? And so like speed dating is done today, males switch chairs, so by the end, you get to see 10 dates or 20 dates. So here's what we learned back then. And I'm going to share with you these results because as you'll see, what we observed back then turned out to be very true today. If anything, what you see today is even more intensified than what I'm going to describe to you is what we saw about 15 years ago. And so here's what you see happen in this speed dating climate. Men and women play different games. They play a different dating game. So women play a fixed number game, whereas men play the ratio game. What do I mean by that? Women decide, okay, I want about 5 or 6 different possibilities. It doesn't matter to me if I see 10 or if I see 20, I'm going to pick 5 or 6. And remember, these women didn't know that there were other women who were picking from 20. So no matter what condition they were in, they picked around 5 or 6. It's like they had a fixed number in their head. And what about the men? Well, they play a ratio game. Hey, I got 10 women to choose from. I want to pick 50%. So I pick 5 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. Now, it gets a little more nuanced and more sophisticated than that, in that men, if you look at their perceptions of how likely is she to say yes to me, if they start to feel that most of these women are going to say no to them, by the time they get towards the last 5 dates, they just start hitting that yes button over and over and over again, because they got a ratio in their head that they got to meet, right? You certainly see that when you look at people's swiping, their swiping rates today, right? So males, they want to hit that ratio. Now, what are they looking for? What do they claim they're looking for anyway? Turns out men say they're about 18% higher in terms of that they're looking for looks. And in fact, that pans out when you look at which women they're more likely to say yes to in terms of their perceptions of her looks. That, of course, goes out the window towards the later part of the dating cycle, because if they think they're not scoring, they're going to say yes, independent of whether they thought she was attractive or not, because obviously girls get prettier at closing time. Women, on the other hand, will say they want men who are more ambitious, more intelligent. What's interesting about that is that women are better than men, at least in a 4-minute period, at judging a man's intelligence. It turned out women's ratings of the male's intelligence in that 4-minute period was highly correlated with the men's GRE scores. So these were mainly all Columbia graduate students that participated, so we actually knew their GRE scores. Men rate lower females' ambition and intelligence. They don't want somebody who's more ambitious or intelligent than them. They want somebody equal or below, but they're not as accurate at judging it as our women. What about racial preferences? What about racial preferences? So it turns out women are the gatekeepers on racial, on the sort of interracial dating. So it turns out that men will say yes to women of a lot more varieties than will women. So women serve as those gatekeepers. And there are certain races that tend to be less preferred, like Asian males or Black African American females. Okay, so I know I'm running out of time. I actually ran way out of time already.
You started late.
Okay, but let me just try to end with an idea for you to think about. So I want you to look at these 2 nail polish colors. Okay? So one of these is adorable, and one of these is ballet slippers. And when I show you the 2 names, it all makes sense. Sure, adorable and ballet slippers are 2 different colors. And yet, most of us would say, yeah, they're different, but does it really matter? Now, if you're a real nail polish connoisseur, I'm sure it matters to you. But let's just say, unless you are a real connoisseur, it's confusing. And here's what I want to argue to you. I want to argue to you that when you look at that proliferation of dating apps that we have created right now in the marketplace, it's like having a dizzying array of pink nail polishes. And I say that, and I understand some of you might be offended by me describing it that way. I say that because there's a lot of tweaking going on. And, should I give them 3 at happy hour, or should I give them, 100 people that they could swipe on? You're manipulating choice, you're manipulating niche, but you're not actually understanding that your customers are beyond that phase of simply appreciating having more choice. They're more sophisticated than that. That's done. We are in a marketplace of a lot of choice. They want something more than mere superficial curation of choice. What they want is for you to understand the kind of choosing experience that they want, but they don't know how to articulate it. So what do they articulate to you? They articulate to you, hey, I'm experiencing fatigue. I'm tired of swiping. Or, hey, this is the commoditization of humans. I don't like that. Really what they're saying is, I don't like it when I'm judged unfairly. And I'm getting tired of judging other people. Or they're saying, hey, I want a meaningful relationship, damn it. You're not giving me that. What are you giving me? You're giving me a bunch of noise, a bunch of trash. And yet you will argue back to me, yeah, but you know what? Every customer now has 4 or 5 different apps and they're still playing. And I'm going to say to you, yes, but you're not giving them what you want. If you look at what the marketplace is in dating today, my argument to you is it's like any nascent market. We've gone through that period where we throw darts and we experiment with lots of little variations, just like we did when we were going through the revolution and the evolution of the car industry, just like we did with the phone industry. It is now time to consolidate because your customers are more sophisticated. And I'm going to argue to you that there are 2 kinds of customers today, and it's up to you as to the extent to which you want to deliver to those customers what they're looking for. And I'm going to describe these 2 types to you using the language of choice, since that's the only thing I really know anything about. And those 2 customers are first the explorers. These are the people, hey, I don't know what I want. Stop trying to give me things and think I know what I want. I want you to show me and teach me what I want. And so that's the experience I'm looking for. I'm not looking to get what I want. I'm looking to pay you to give me an experience, a choosing process. Now, Tinder was a leader in that, right? They gave me a process. It's not about finding the one. It's about giving me an experience. I can swipe. It's like a game. It's kind of fun. And I'm going to argue to you that those choosers are growing in number. They're looking for a process. They're looking for an experience of self-learning, self-discovery. And that self-learning, self-discovery is, Tinder is not competing with Match.com or OkCupid. It's competing with video games like Candy Crush or Angry Birds on the one side, and they're competing with porn, like Pornhub. Or I think there's even one that's called Tinder Fuck or something. So what are they actually providing people? Experiences for self-learning. And that experiences for self-learning goes beyond just seeing a photo. It's not about relationships. It's about having that cool experience where I'm feeling like, hey, I learned something about what I like and what I don't like. The other type is the preference matcher. The preference matcher says, I know what I want. It's like that person who knows exactly what kind of dish they want in the Chinese restaurant. They know exactly what they want. And they want your help to help find it, to search it for them, to make their choosing experience much, much, much easier and more enjoyable. They don't want to have to do all the weeding out. Now, until now, we did these simple, easy to do algorithms based on using AI, etc. Like, okay, let's just have them do personality tests, and then you can match 2 people on their personality types or match people on their shared interests. And that helps once they're actually in a relationship. Might actually reduce some conflict, but that's not what creates connection. That's not what actually gets them interested in each other to begin with. What gets them interested in each other to begin with is having an experience that makes them feel that we just formed a meaningful connection. And how do we construct that meaningful connection? That means that we as the dating providers have to create those meaningful experiences and opportunities for the individuals. Now, And I mean, I'm already over, so I'm just going to show you one quick study, but there's actually a lot to this. But essentially what that's all about is how do you create an authentic connection? And I'll leave you with one little tidbit here. Let's imagine I bring male, female, not even into a room. This is actually done during COVID, online, right? And they see different objects. They experience different objects. So they're given a bunch of objects. So they're going to see color. They're going to touch some fabric. They're going to eat something. So we had different sensory experiences. The two parties are asked to describe what they're experiencing. In some cases, they're told, hey, just share your experiences. In other cases, they're told, you know what, you'll share and then you'll get to see whether you are seeing the same thing. Turns out if I put that pressure on, you're not going to create a connection. But if I take away that pressure and I just tell you to share your experiences, regardless of whether you agree or not, those are individuals that subsequently feel that they had a connection with each other. They also feel that what they both experienced was more real, and the effects of that actually last at least a month later. So to conclude, what I'm suggesting here is that I think there's a real opportunity in the dating world, where I think the opportunity here is to actually go to the next level of giving people a more sophisticated choosing experience, where you're either giving them that real opportunity to explore or that real opportunity to engage in significant preference matching. Thank you very much.
There we go. We've got the mic back on. Thank you very much, Professor Iyengar. That was fantastic. We'd love to have you back to explore this further. So I must transition over to Geoff. We've got Geoff Cook queued up as well. So Geoff, we have you speaking on Reality TV 2.0 is the answer to dating app flatness. That's the title of your presentation. If you want to bring up your slides.
I actually don't have slides, Mark.
No? Okay, all right. So I also want to say thank you very much for the support as well, just on a personal basis. Your support and encouragement with LTR and other initiatives has been very, very important to me. I appreciate it. So thank you very much. I will get out your way and let you present. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I just want to, before I get started, say that was a tremendous presentation. I also appreciated Sheena's TED Talk, which has millions of views. Everyone should check that out. Thank you, Professor. As a further aside, this question of choice is clearly relevant to dating apps. We often overwhelm our members with choice. And the professor's comments, I think, suggest that a few daily recommendations pioneered by apps like Coffee Meets Bagel and The League are perhaps the most natural and human way to date today. If you do watch the TED Talk, I think the professor's research is also very relevant to our current moment, where we are forced to make choices we have little basis to make and that we are not experts at, like whether to send our children to in-person school or remote instruction, choosing to prioritize normalcy in childhood and mental health or family health, essentially just adding to our collective stress levels. This pushing of choice down to the lowest level, to the people least equipped to make choices, is also relevant to dating. The fewer but the more appropriate the choices, the better. Less is more. The winners, I can only imagine, in such a world of limited choice will almost certainly be the companies who deploy AI most intelligently. The best recommendation AI running against the largest data set that then provides the choices in a human-friendly, limited way is likely the winning strategy. So now to change gears a bit to the topic of my talk, which is Reality TV 2.0, and why I think that's the answer to dating app flatness. Dating app flatness. So that may surprise you, but dating apps are essentially flat the world over. And you don't have to take it from me. You could take a look at App Annie data for any popular dating app in the world. In August this year, Tinder had 61 million monthly users globally, which was down slightly from 64 million a year ago. And no, they didn't all go to Bumble. According to App Annie, Bumble was flat to down as well. I believe dating needs a new trick, something other than selling more and higher price subscriptions. Subscription just isn't what it used to be. It's peaking. The largest dating company in the world, the Match Group, has 9 million subscribers last year, but it has only about 10 million subscribers this year. If you assume Wall Street analysts are right and about 60% of Match's subscriptions are Tinder, then only about 10% of dating app users will ever pay for a subscription on a service optimized to do nothing but drive the highest possible number of subscribers and extract the most value out of each one. I say 10% is not good enough. 90% of the audience should not be reduced to being merely the content for the other 10%. 10% cannot be the global maximum of payers. It must represent only a local maximum and a failure of product imagination. Dating apps must find a way to monetize the other 90%. This audience represents the latent potential for dating industry growth. Imagine hundreds of millions of more users monetizing in some way other than buying a boring monthly subscription. And no, charging more for subscriptions is not an answer to slowing dating industry growth. And this is easy to see. Imagine a restaurant that sells lunch for $20. If the manager were a genius, she might be able to raise the price of lunch from $20 to $40 without reducing the number of patrons. But that trick is not going to last forever. Just about no one is going to spend $100 for lunch, and no one is going to spend $100 a month for a dating app either. There's another problem with subscriptions. They cap every buyer at too low a limit of spending. Someone may be willing to pay $1,000 or even $10,000 a month on dating-related products. But with a subscription-only product, that person will pay the same as about everyone else, which is generally about $25 a month today. Yes, the dating app could try to vary subscription prices by age and gender, but only if it doesn't mind being sued out of existence by class action claims of price discrimination. Dating apps need a new trick. I'm not saying it hasn't been a good run, but monetizing only the top 10% was never going to work forever. It's time to diversify away from subscription, but towards what? I say entertainment. Dating has been entertaining audiences for decades. It was 55 years ago that the dating game launched on ABC. Blind Date, Temptation Island, The Bachelor, and scores of other dating shows followed. Since 2000 and the dawning of the age of low-cost reality television, dating shows became only more popular. In many ways, dating shows are the original reality TV. So what does reality TV 2.0 look like? This question is more relevant than ever because reality TV 1.0 is over. Just this week, on Tuesday, Kim Kardashian broke the news on Instagram that Keeping Up with the Kardashians will be ending after a 14-year run. It's not hard to speculate why. The answer is certainly not flagging interest in the famous family's shenanigans. Far from it. The family has 782 million Instagram followers. It's clear what is disrupting reality television. No-cost reality content is streaming everywhere. It's on your phone, it's on the internet, but now the stars actually know who you are. They respond to you in real time on chats. They call out your name on channels like Twitch's Just Chatting, Instagram Live, and TikTok. And yes, you can even date them. They might not be television stars, but in the aggregate, they are bigger than all the television stars put together. Live streaming video has enabled influencers to find an audience and make a living with as few as hundreds of paying fans. At the end, influencers with tens of thousands of paying fans can make a killing without being beholden to television networks and long-term contracts. The solution to dating app doldrums is obvious. Dating apps should own the modern dating game. The next Bachelor, the next Are You the One should be live streamed on Tinder or on Bumble or on Grindr. Only there should be no stars, or at least the stars should have no more access to the platform than anyone else, only more fans. Anyone should be able to be the star of her own dating game. It is high time dating apps seize the space that is rightfully theirs and own the dating reality show genre. If they don't, it's quite clear what will happen. Facebook or Amazon will. After all, those are the companies with limitless resources and massive existing live streaming platforms with the AI capacity to show the right stream to the right user at the right time. What would a modern dating show look like? It would look like a hot mess, and that's why people would watch it. People love to live vicariously through their perceived betters. That's why celebrity is a thing. What it won't look like is HQ. It won't be slickly produced, scheduled content. It will always be on, at times wacky, and dare I say it, even fun. It will look like Twitch, except for dating. Most of the people, tens of millions of people, will be there for love. At the highest end, a new breed of dating celebrity would earn $10 million a year live streaming, while many thousands more would earn hundreds of thousands a year. After all, most people on Twitch aren't there to make money. They're there for community, for fun. But that doesn't stop Twitch from being any less profitable. Twitch streamers make billions of dollars a year. The same would be true of streamers on dating apps. Even if only 5 million of Tinder's 20+ million estimated daily daters watch live streams, and each one spent on average only 60 cents, that's $1 billion a year in revenue. And it's a layup, and that's just one app. The dating industry is so much bigger than one app. In every respect, the concept is analogous to how Snapchat built a content business on top of its messaging distribution. When you have so many tens of millions of daily users sending billions of chats every day, you only need 15% of them to spend 30 minutes more to build one of the largest content companies on the planet. And what's the alternative exactly? The pandemic has forever changed the nature of dating, tilting it toward video. That much is obvious. Daters are hungry for more video. The only question is in what form. Sure, one-on-one video has a place, but somewhere less than 5% of all daily daters will ever engage in one-on-one video on a mainstream dating app. There's a reason no dating app company ever touts this particular statistic. It's too low. Why does one-on-one matter so little? Could it be because it's the highest friction product imaginable? One-on-one video is essentially a lousy product that dating apps must offer simply because you expect them to, even though they know you'll never use it. One-on-one video requires that both sides of the conversation be clothed, ready and willing to stream, and wanting to consume the stream of another long-tail content producer who is similarly ready and willing to stream. One-on-one video is a shadow of the potential of its more interesting cousin, broadcast video. Broadcast video, or one-to-many video, requires none of those things. The beauty of broadcast video is that there are 10 people willing to view a stream for every one person willing to create one, and therein lies both the engagement and the monetization magic. Some of those 10 viewers will monetize. On Twitch, the top video game streamers earn millions of dollars through broadcast video. The same is true on China's Momo's dating platform. What's more, on both Twitch and Momo, they earn the same way, from virtual gifts, a form of tipping, a way of supporting influencers. The model has been proven again and again, and it's coming to a dating app near you, and hopefully soon. Virtual gifting monetizes those who would never pay for a subscription. And unlike subscription, it monetizes up to each individual spender's willingness to pay. It's the right product at the right time for an industry badly in need of a second act. While the monetization potential of broadcast video is tremendous, it is its capacity for engagement that keeps users coming back. Dating apps are not exactly the greatest products on earth, let's be clear. Their net promoter scores are generally negative. People mostly hate them. Hinge, one of the most popular dating apps in the world, has the slogan, "Designed to be deleted." What if a dating app could be just a little more fun? What if it was like a neighborhood bar or nightclub? What if it felt alive? What if at the moment you are waiting for a chat, or after you've swiped right on your daily quota, and while no one is matching you, when your loneliness is at its peak, what if at that moment you could easily connect with someone nearby live? What if they call out your name when you enter their stream? What if they respond to the questions you ask in chat? What if you could even join them streaming? What if there's chemistry? What if you could even meet them in real life? It's not crazy to add an element of fun to a dating category so stridently defined for its joylessness. If dating apps can provide a meaningful connection and an antidote to loneliness through low-friction live streaming video, then why don't they? Video killed the radio star, and if dating apps don't change, it will kill the swipe too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoff. My goodness, there's an awful lot to unpack in there. My goodness, a lot to think about. So as I mentioned, we will be running these videos afterwards, so you'll have another shot at reviewing the content in all of these. The only thing I wonder is if it'd be worthwhile actually running them somewhere that we can converse a bit more privately. So I'll put some thought into that. Please let me know your thoughts as well, because there's a lot more discussion can be had around each of these videos I'm thinking. Right, next up we've got Adam Cohen-Aslatei, who is the CEO and founder of Smore, and we're going to talk about, let me pull it up. I've just gone blank. What are we? The anti-superficial dating. Let's make sure I get the title right. Anti-superficial dating. So Adam, take it away. Adam, the mic is off. Could we have you back up? Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Is it good? Yes, perfect, cool. All right, guys, let's give this another whirl. All right, guys, my name is Adam Cohen-Aslatei. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Smore, which stands for Something More. We are the world's first anti-superficial relationship app, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you about why the next revolution in online dating is much less superficial. Quick background on myself. I've been in the online dating industry for over 10 years. I actually built my first dating website as a grad student at Harvard, and then spent over 5 years working for the Meet Group with Geoff. I also spent time running Chappie, which is Bumble's gay dating app, and then also spend time consulting in the industry for companies like the Spark Network. So I've been around the block just a bit. So let's get into it. 95% of all dating apps focus on image first. So we live in a very image-centric world, and I think the industry really changed over 8.5 years ago when Tinder launched the swipe. The swipe essentially is the concept of hot or not brought into the dating world. Now, while it's been quite fun to use, and we understand how sticky the UX and UI is and the product works and it's fun, it actually doesn't necessarily lead people into mass relationships. There are millions of people who have been in relationships because of them, still grossly inefficient. We've gone to a very superficial approach to dating over the last 8 years with the introduction of the iPhone, with the introduction of Android phones as well. But a lot of things are just about to change, and I'm sure some of you already noticed the changes taking place in our industry. But let's focus on what went wrong first, and then let's try to fix it. So let's break down the house. Here we go. Focusing on image first has led to and contributed to some seriously negative consequences in our industry. For example, you have the hypersexualization of images on an app. So women and men also feel now compelled to put scantily clad images of themselves on apps. Why? Because they know how to game the system. It literally is a game. The sexier you are, statistically speaking, the more swipes in favor you have of yourself. But what that leads to, and what that has contributed to in the world, is 1/3 of women now say that they've been sexually harassed by someone that they've met on a dating app. So we as a society are hypersexualizing this concept, and it's actually led to some very negative consequences. People are also not authentic. We as an industry talk about authenticity all the time, but 51% of people say they lie on their profiles. Women lie mostly about their body weight and their weight and their body type, and men are lying about their careers and their income. Also, people are overly airbrushed. 38% of people admit to airbrushing photos. 50% of people admit to using old photos. And there's a big chunk of users, 43 to 28% of people, admit that they've been catfished on dating apps. Now, we can definitely do better than that. Plus, other negative consequences that have happened because of the prevalence of casual dating and swiping apps, in part, has been led to the decrease in self-esteem that people feel. Again, we're being judged just based on a headshot. People are starting conversations and ending conversations very quickly. And we feel a sense of validation when we get a swipe on us. We have an increase in depression, again, with millennials, with Gen Zers, and those who use dating apps, and also an increase in anxiety. Now, what else is an issue? I hate to paint a negative picture, but 50% of online daters say that they report having bad experiences on dating apps. And by the way, almost 2/3 or over 2/3 of people say dating apps actually make it harder to fall in love. We've heard from many of the speakers today about the concept of selection, right? When you go to a buffet and you want to eat everything, I do this in Vegas, right? I literally put everything on the plate and it does not taste good together, but my eyes are huge and I want to eat everything. Well, it actually doesn't lead to better outcomes. It leads to far worse outcomes. And 1/3 of people that use swiping-based apps never go on a single date. So essentially, they're using dating apps as softcore porn, which is not the purpose of a dating app. But let's be honest, swiping may be fun, and we've all done it before. It is addictive, it's exciting, and it's a fun technology, but it is grossly inefficient when it comes to how people are matching and actually ending up in relationships. If you take the typical man using a top-tier casual swiping app, it takes the man 1,500 swipes in order to land a single date. So for the man, 1,500 swipes translates into about 150 matches, and he needs 150 matches to land a single date, and a single date lasts for 1.8 hours. Guys, as an industry, we can all do better. We have been able to bring millions of users together, millions of love seekers together. We've had millions of romances, millions of marriages, but we can do much, much better and tackle the problem head on. Also, the industry is shifting quite quickly, and this is the way it's shifting in. So user behavior has changed quite dramatically over the last 8 years since the emergence of Tinder. Relationships now people are looking for more long-term relationships than casual encounters. This began to change in 2018, and now long-term relationships are what people are looking for first and foremost on dating apps. If you look at the data behind why, there's a few reasons why this may be the case. Firstly, 50% of all millennials are single, completely single, and the oldest millennials are turning 40 in 2020. So they've spent 8 years swiping and they are now hopelessly single. Also, Gen Zers are more inclined to want to be in a relationship than millennials were at the same time, at the same age in their own life. And also the majority of users on Bumble and Tinder, which are two of the most popular casual encounter apps, the majority of those users even say, hey, I actually want something more. I want more than a casual encounter. Now, COVID has magnified this issue that we talk about. Why? Because when you're just dating a million people, there's an infinite inventory. You can go on a date every single night. When you're in COVID and you're under quarantine, you start to reflect on the things that you don't have. You may have an amazing apartment, you may have a great job, you may have a great set of friends, but you are home alone. So it starts to have people reflect on what they've been doing incorrectly and maybe helping to try and change their behaviors. And we're starting to see this happen in the dating world. In fact, there's been a huge increase in dating app usage over the last 4 to 5 months, especially with relationship-focused apps. Very important to point that out. Now, so people are saying that they actually want to be in longer-term relationships as opposed to casual relationships, then why are we still swiping? Literally, the antithesis of a relationship app is judging a book by its cover, right? But this continues to be the #1 mechanic in our industry. That is until now. This is going out the window and is being replaced. And let me tell you what it's being replaced with. So firstly, the average person makes a swiping decision in under 3 seconds. There is no way that you could know if if that person is going to be compatible with you just based on the way that they look. And in fact, most people aren't reading bios. People tend to read bios of profiles when they're unsure if the person is hot enough. Then if it's a maybe, then I'm going to look through the bio a little bit more. And that's where the whole industry is about to change. The new normal is this anti-superficial dating approach. Now, some of you may have heard of anti-superficial dating or less superficial dating. but maybe don't exactly know what it is. So the concept of anti-superficial dating is really about getting to know a person before deciding if you like them and before you see them. So it's an intentional relationship approach where you're, again, not filtering someone just based on the way that they look. And why is this important? Why? Because in 2020, there's a very large group of users, and we've mentioned the data previous to now, that are using airbrushed photos, they are using outdated photos, or they're using photos that are simply not of themselves. So the experience is one that is not that pleasant. And so to get beyond there, to actually solve the challenge of getting people into relationships requires a different way of thinking. And that is the anti-superficial approach. Now, before we get into the anti-superficial approach, let's talk about some things that we as an industry need to change before we get there. First, there are some very popular premium features on dating apps, mostly on swiping apps, which really does prove the fact that people are making decisions based on little more than a selfie, based on little more than a headshot. For example, this concept of a backtrack or a rewind. Many apps have it. It literally proves that I'm swiping by people so quickly and judging people so quickly based on a headshot, but wait, I think they're still hot, let me go back. This is one of the most popular premium features. It's really not designed to get people into relationships. Until we change our user behavior, we're not going to be in relationships because we were taught to, by apps, judge people simply based on a headshot, first and foremost, the #1 screener. Other things that we need to do as an industry to get past the superficiality of dating apps is really think about the concept of race filtering. So race filtering is something that exists on many apps, including many in the Match group. And the way that most people use race filtering is to filter in for white men and for white women. Now, what happens then is the races that get the least amount of exposure on dating apps are Black women and Asian men. So what happens is they have less enjoyment on the app because they have less exposure on the app, less activity on the app, and they leave the app. But what it means for society is we have less experiences with different ethnicities together. So our understanding of those ethnicities is significantly diminished. My thought and my wish for the industry is to get rid of this concept of having ethnic or race filtering and let people connect on something more. Let people have that magical conversation that you may never realize that you will end up with an Asian man or an African-American woman because you never really gave them a chance. And now this magic is able to actually happen. So in our industry, there's been a massive shift in user behavior, as mentioned, taking place. First of all, we've been swiping for over 8 years. So swiping is really fun. It is quite engaging, but now there's some kind of fatigue, right? What else? What is next? There's also been a bit of a backlash over vanity metrics. Many of the large social media sites, and including dating sites as well, don't show you the publicly available likes on someone's profile because it leads to anxiety, feelings of negativity and depression, etc. And then of course we've been demoralized by the photos that we see. But the less superficial approach to dating is actually quite interesting because what it means is someone's connecting on more than a pretty face, on more than a headshot. What that does is that gets you away from the top of the funnel, which is just swiping past photos, into conversations much quicker. And it's gamified, right? It still feels like a fun, exciting way to get to know someone else in a very novel way. And there's a ton of examples of apps that are doing this today, and we're going to get into some examples in a few minutes. Also, the less superficial approach to dating is quite interesting because functionally, it gets you into a conversation faster. And if the reason for you to use a dating app is to be in a relationship, then of course you need to be in conversations quicker in order to get that done. Well, in order to do that, you can't be judging a person based on a headshot. And finally, it is literally the greatest equalizer. When you get rid of the concept of racial filters in an app, what you end up doing is you become vulnerable. You suspend your judgment in favor of a conversation. And that conversation may be with someone who you never in a million years imagined that you would be with. And because you gave that person a shot at love, pun intended, you're able to have new connections that can form today that never were able to form in the past because we don't have these concepts of race filtering. So when you think about the anti-superficial approach, I actually want to give you some concrete examples so you know what I'm talking about. It is not pie in the sky, but it is also not as simple to understand as a swiping mechanism, because there's different ways in which apps use the concept of being anti-superficial. So one of the apps that I like actually is called Friended. So they're an app that is 50% about friends and 50% about romantic relationships. And you can see a graphic of what that app looks like on the right-hand side here. Essentially, you are connecting with someone over a statement about themselves or the way that they're answering a question. And you can see that their headshot is significantly minimized in this graphic. There's another app that I love that's called Lex. It's a lesbian dating app. And the way their approach to relationships is people are creating classified ads. So we'll harken back to the days before dating apps and people writing romantic notes in newspapers or ads in newspapers for love. So on Lex, you're able to create this amazing note. And if someone connects with that person through that note and clicks on the ad, then they're able to see what the photo looks like. Profoundly, another amazing example. They are one of the fastest growing dating apps in India. They're now available in the US. It's actually a chatbot, and it lives on Facebook and also the app called Line. And what it does is it's a chatbot that facilitates the conversation between two people that cannot see each other. And the chatbot decides at what point to reveal photos of the other person. And one other quick example that I'll mention here is Muzzmatch. Muzzmatch is one of the most popular, or probably the most popular Muslim-focused dating app in the world. They also have a swiping mechanic, but they let women blur themselves out. And the woman decides at what point they want to be revealed to the man, so that the beginning of their relationship really focuses on what do we have in common? Who are we? What are our values? And what do we want to get out of a marriage, essentially? So these are all different anti-superficials approach to dating. Now, this is not just a niche concept. The concept of anti-superficial dating, I guarantee you in 2 years, you will see in every major dating app in the US. Here are a couple examples of mainstream dating apps that are already implementing it. So the Meet Group is mentioned today by Geoff. They have a product called Blind Date, where two people get to have this conversation without seeing each other. Now, in the case of the Meet Group, it's a live streaming event where you can actually watch this taking place, which is quite fun and exciting. But the two people really do want to go on a date with each other. And what happens when you have this concept of blurred dating, the data actually suggests that blurred dating leads to much longer conversations and more a sense of a connection because of the intrigue of not seeing that person. Apps like Say Hello, which I think is also represented here today by Zachary, he also has a product that has the concept of blurred video dating. Bumble introduced the concept of blurred images when you send a photo inside of a chat. So again, the concepts are starting to be implemented throughout our industry. But let me tell you what we're doing here at SMORE. So SMORE stands for something more. And something more is the #1 term that people use when they give feedback on dating apps. SMORE also represents a layered cookie, getting to know all the layers of a person, sandwiched into the equality sign, so it's for everyone. And it's held together by a chat icon or a marshmallow, which essentially shows you that communication is the key to any relationship and conversation. So our brand ethos literally is you deserve something more than what you've seen on other apps, and you deserve a real relationship and conversations. And as an example, we don't have a single feature that's anti-superficial. Our entire approach to getting people to connect is one that's 100% rooted in not judging a book by its cover. So on SMORE, you won't see race filters, you won't see age filters, you won't see structured profiles. The vast majority of dating apps, I think every single one that I've ever worked for or seen, uses very structured profiles. Now, structured profiles are great. It looks very organized and clean. But human beings pay attention to what is visually different. So if the only visual difference between two profiles is the image on top, which is your headshot, that's what you're going to focus on. If you have unstructured profiles a la MySpace, which I hope some of you used, it was, for those of you who are youngins on the call, MySpace was a very popular social media site 10 years ago or more. But what was cool about MySpace was that your space and MySpace did not feel like the same space. So it allowed for this sort of discovery mechanic to emerge, where I could listen to your voice, listen to your favorite music, and your profile had different colors and different fonts. That is the way that SMORE is actually structured today. We also have 100% verified profiles. We also rate your behavior. So we are building up an app where every single feature was intentional to get you into a relationship in a way that doesn't have you judge a book by its cover. And again, that is the core ethos of S'more. Now, what are the results from an anti-superficial approach? I will tell you, it is by far a much more engaging approach than a typical swipe app. So on S'more, as an example, the conversation lengths on S'more are about 2 times what the industry average is. In addition to that, the stickiness factor, how many people come back per day versus how many people come back to your app per month, is also significantly higher than a typical swiping app. Retention also extremely high. And in the case of S'more, we were named the #2 best dating app in the US by Ask Men, and our app is only 8 months old. We're also a top 10 dating app by Mary Claire. On S'more, you will find 100% of people have verified profiles and 100% people have completed profiles. 92% of people have a behavioral score that is 4 or above. Why is that important? Because as we know as an industry, men typically don't behave very well on dating apps. And unless you keep people accountable for their actions, you are going to have a tainted environment and ecosystem. So we make sure that we have a behavioral score, which is the first thing you see even before you see the image of a person, and many more features as well. The concept of less superficial dating actually is not an American-centric ideology or approach. It's one that's very international, which I'm very happy and excited to share with you guys today, because it's been very hard for a lot of the swiping apps to transition to more international markets, especially those that are conservative, because showing a lot of skin or focusing on image is really against their culture. So when you have an anti-superficial approach, when you hide images at the beginning and you connect on the soul of the person, it actually translates much better to countries like India, the Middle East, Africa, and even China. So as you think about how to develop anti-superficial features and practices, understand that it's going to really help you as you extend your brand internationally. So what kind of features can you develop and really have people connect on more than a transactional approach, right? Transactional means once I find my person, I'm off your app, versus community, which is, yes, I can use your app to find someone special, but even if I have that someone special there, I can still meet people in more indirect ways. These are some really good examples of indirectly connecting people in a romantic sort of environment like a dating app. So multiplayer games, so trivia games between 2 people, that's a very good way of getting to know one another. Chat rooms, news feeds, forums, and other shareable content that people can interact and react to are great ways of starting new relationships. So on S'more, users report finding a compatible match in 50% less time than on a casual app. So on typical casual apps, the average user is spending 2 to 3 years finding someone on those apps. So think about what that means for the time spent there. And also think about the fact that we're not just trying to get people connected and leave our ecosystem. We're trying to get people connected and stay on our ecosystem. There should be other ways for people to connect, even if you're in a relationship, to meet new people. And finally, the industry, I hope I didn't paint a very gloomy picture of the industry. Our industry is in hyper growth mode. Dating is not mature. Last year, as eMarketer reported a few weeks ago, our industry increased over 18% in 1 year, and over 23% of American users are willing to pay for dating app features, whether it's a subscription or in-app purchases. If you think about the early days of dating, and Geoff Cook knows as well, back at Meet Me when I worked there, it was 100% advertising. You could not get a person to pay for any part of that app or any part of any app. Today, people are willing to put their money where their mouth is and invest more in these great experiences, which is a huge positive. And remember, this is not coming from me. Michelle Obama literally said this yesterday on her podcast, that you cannot Tinder yourself into a long-term relationship. Guys and girls, it takes a lot of work, but let's create apps that actually facilitate these deeper connections so that we can fulfill the promise that we set out to do. And finally, I will leave you with a quick snapshot of what S'more looks like, and also tell all of you to check out S'more Live Happy Hour. As also Geoff mentioned, video and celebrity is a very important part of our industry, and S'more started its own celebrity dating show on Instagram, which has become wildly successful, and it's a very important part of also brand creation. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I really appreciate being here. Thanks so much, Mark.
information is needed, and we have more control over behavior than I think we realize, actually. So next up, we have Dan from FTI Consulting. Dan, if you'd like to jump in, you can turn your cam and mic on. Bear in mind, once again, we're going to rerun these videos, so don't worry if you've missed some of the video or want to get further into it. We'll be running these and furthering the conversation on the videos when we run them. So you'll see behavior mentioned more and more within LTR, even on OPW. If you really want to get into behavioral science, I do recommend having a look at my little site, behavioraleconomist.com. And you know, we've got the greats Cass Sunstein and Dan Ariely in that community, actually. So that's a good place to learn more about the commercial side of behavioral economics. Great, we're all queued up. So let me introduce Dan. Dan Healy is the MD of FTI Consulting, and along with Real Me, has produced a survey and analysis, which I think is very worthy of your attention. And I look forward to seeing this and getting the results, and also want to thank Real Me for sponsoring LTR and our existence. So thank you very much. Take it away. Thank you, Dan.
Right, thanks, Mark. I hope you didn't raise expectations too much there. Yes, this is market research that we conducted back in May, so fairly recent, and in some points we're going to be comparing it to some of the research that we actually did about a year ago. And that's really to highlight what the current situation is like, what sort of impact the COVID-19 pandemic has actually had on behavior in relation to the online dating webs app world. The research we conducted, as I was saying, it's back in May. It was with just over 3,000 the US general population. And apologies, this is a bit of the geekiness of actually just telling you a bit of background, actually, how we did it, so you can actually then sort of place some credence on the research results. So we started with the just over 3,000 US general population. We made sure it was in the right proportions in terms of age, gender, various demographics, and location, even actually how they voted and whether they actually did vote in the US presidential election. That's actually to get an idea of actually we're getting the right proportions across society. From that, we then actually asked them if they're actually using or have been using dating apps and websites since the outbreak of the pandemic. And we ended up with just over 1,000, so about a third of the population claiming they've actually been using it at least once. So it was interesting insight. We asked, the questionnaire was about 15 minutes long. They're able to complete it online, a convenient time to them on mobile devices and everything else well there. But the key thing is that we have so much insight. We asked a lot of questions that we're not presenting today, so feel free to get in touch to find out more information, or actually even a much deeper analysis of it as all. So one of the things that we actually also did with not presenting is actually looked at the various, the 5 personality traits from an ocean theory point of view as well. And it's fascinating when you look at it from an age, a gender, location, education background, but also look at it from a personality point of view. And that's where the research results really do come alive. Without further ado, I will go into some of the results now. And this is some of the things that Geoff and in particular Adam were sort of referencing as well. In particular about, it's almost like people presenting themselves in these apps in a less than authentic way, do I say, bordering on outright lying and deception that goes on. So this is actually what people are actually admitting they're actually doing in an online survey. So it's not, that's the best thing about online surveys. That's, they don't have to pretend they have a persona. There's no reason for them to not tell the truth, and that's what we're getting. So I think this is sort of a bit of the tip of the iceberg, albeit these quite startling figures. But we've got 75%, 3 in 4, admitting to have misrepresented themselves in their dating profile, believing it is important to look their best online if that means distorting reality. And that's sort of collaborating with some of the research results that were presented earlier. Now, since this time, pretty well this time last year, when we asked the same question, it was 57%. It is skyrocketed to 75%. and you can talk about reasons why they're doing that. Who knows as well there. But it's so curious when you actually break it down to actually what are they actually doing. So 25% admit to having used old photos to make themselves look younger. Okay, interesting. Generation X, that actually increases to 29%. They're much more likely, understandably, because they're an older generation, to do that. And that figure has actually increased by 2.5% since last year. The one that's really increased, and it's an out-and-out lie, is you actually using photos of other people. Now it's 21% at the moment. That is increased by 9%. So it's almost doubled in terms of propensity of actually doing that. Maybe actually seeing other people doing it and actually getting away with it. You know, in terms of what is actually driving this behavior? More competition. Who knows? So the next one I'll highlight, 21% admit, same proportion, admit to having exaggerated their height or age, and that's an increase of 6%. One would imagine that there's very little intention of actually catching up with someone or meeting them in person if they're actually lying about, you know, their height, age, and also using photos of other people as well. So that's very curious. And actually, when you start thinking about what are the motivations, actually how they're using these apps in their lives, do they really intend to actually to meet up with someone in person, or is it actually much more about the engagement in this domain as well? So you can see on the right hand side we've got an exaggeration of the wealth that's increased by 5%, marital status 3% as well. There's a curious thing, we were interpreting results, actually seeing so many people who are actually married using these apps. And it's not to say that they want to cheat on their partner. And we found that we're discussing things about that. There could be it seems to be the polar opposites in terms of the isolation. Either it's been the making of the relationship and they're going to have another child or have a child as well, similar to the baby boom after World War II. Or it's actually they'll be going to lining up at the divorce court. So maybe they're preempting the latter as well. Who knows? I'm reading into it. We've got lifestyle, and you've seen those photos, fabulous, glamorous locations as well. 16% claiming they're exaggerating it. It's not the reality, increased by 4%. Job title role, and you can see that's not particularly much of a movement. And the figures go down and down in terms of the propensity for people to lie and distort. I think one of the most sobering ones at the bottom there on the right hand side, 9%, albeit relatively low, it's increased by 3%. They're actually are trying to cover up some potential convictions as well, and that's I guess that's probably quite a sort of more of a serious aspect of all the different things actually misrepresenting themselves in this domain. So that is increased hugely. That leads into some of the questions, and actually our work with Real Me as well. So we've got 98% virtually all online datas appeal to the idea of a reputation checker that pulls together all public information sources to authenticate people. What's curious is actually, and it's like the two-edged coin, two-sided coin, I should say. It's about people's willingness to distort and deceive in these domain, but they don't like it when it's done to them. And actually, they actually almost know the propensity of it, maybe sort of when they've seen other people doing it as well and knowing what they do themselves. But they want a system that actually sorts out the wheat from the chaff, to tell you the reality. And dare I say, if they're actually, investing a considerable amount of time and effort in these domains, there's an entertainment aspect, engagement, linking up with the personality types as well that we looked at from the ocean theory. But they don't like it when they're deceived and they're wasting their time. And that seems to be reflected in some of the research results we've got there. 80% of online daters would be more likely to trust a dating platform if it offered background checks or some sort of verification of actually the authenticity of some of these people and what they're putting out in that domain. The same proportion of online daters find it difficult to obtain data that goes beyond personal dating profiles. So we know that, and we've looked at actually the various different sources they actually try to look at, some of them being Facebook, Instagram, and others like that, others offering those links in their profiles as well. But, a lot of them do try to pick up on clues and actually try to do it themselves. They find it difficult. 8 in 10 do try and find it difficult to get this information to authenticate these people. And 75%, it's slightly less, but still 3 in 4, said background checks and verification would make them more likely to get premium membership. We've also seen that it's much more likely to have them to engage in these apps and also to remain loyal to them. So it's the engagement, but also the loyalty aspect as well. So we're seeing a sort of very much, it has an indicator or impact on their behavior. Now, in terms of monetization, I think Geoff was talking about the ratios in terms of users versus monetization aspect as well, is relatively low, arguably. So a bit of a numbers game, but then there's potentially another route to actually to monetize it, which is actually the idea of actually having the verification and background checks. And we broke this down by the different generations because it was so stark. So of all US daters or users of the apps as well, you can see the preference. We've got 16% saying they would not pay for either of these two options. So therefore, 84% would be paying or claim they would pay if there was such a system included in the app, if it was going to be like a premium subscription, and also almost the same ratio, slight difference there as well, would actually pay from an ad hoc verification on an individual basis as well there. So it's interesting it's to see that the ratio does change around a little bit. Similar levels overall in terms of propensity to actually to pay, but it does really drop off a cliff when you get to the baby boomers. 63% claiming they wouldn't pay for either, but they're a relatively smaller proportion overall of the audience who are actually using these apps as well. And I don't know whether they're older, the fact that they're more likely to be retired, or maybe they're sort of probably a little bit more old-fashioned, not believing that people are actually would be distorting reality so much, because we know that the generation, I'm going to say it's Generation Z. I know there's a lot of Americans rather than saying Generation Z, but here I am in London. So they're the ones who are actually really distorting their profiles as well. So it's a fascinating thing. I think certainly it is warranted of actually further investigation in terms of why there's such a difference with these different age groups. Now, what new dating behaviors are emerging? So here we are. Here I am. Sitting at home in my office. I'm not commuting each day to London, which is great as well there, but it's actually quite isolating. I don't get to go to the bars after work. I don't get to take clients out for lunch. I don't have that social interaction as well. So what we're seeing in the research is actually not necessarily myself. What we're actually seeing is actually people actually using these apps. And I think this is some of the things that Geoff was talking about. There is an element of entertainment. What are people doing? They're engaging, they're using this to fill a bit of a void in their lives. As a government, so we have to be in isolation. Now we're not in isolation. Now we have to go back in because there's a second wave apparently. So we've got on the left-hand side, nearly 2 in 3 current users say they are now less picky when liking or swiping. 3 in 4 online daters are now having longer and more meaningful conversations because they've probably got a lot more time on their hands as well and want to immerse themselves much more in the relationships. 69% of current online daters say they now use video features more frequently. Now, what was interesting when we look at the personality traits and actually sort of the openness and the extroversion personality traits, they really gravitate towards that when we actually identify them having those personalities. So they do love the, I talk about very general, big, broad brushstrokes there. They do love, but it's the immersion element as well, which is particularly appealing to that generation or sort of personality traits as well, not surprisingly. Now, 95% of online daters plan to continue with at least one online dating behavior they developed during the pandemic. So what we found is actually wasn't necessarily a huge pickup in the number of people using dating apps from what we did last year. But what we found is actually the length of time and the frequency has actually increased significantly as well. So it doesn't seem to be breaking new ground in a footprint, but it's the engagement is becoming richer and they've certainly got a lot more time than we're seeing that from our perspective in the survey. It'd be interesting to see if anyone's able to talk about some of the analytics that have actually been able to pick up on that themselves to say that's something they're seeing as well. So the next one, what we've also found, we've sort of touched upon a little bit more now in this graph, is actually the loneliness is a particularly acute motivating factor. Now we're seeing that is actually increased by, well, it's by significant amounts in terms of what are your main goals when using the dating app. We've still got overriding, overwhelmingly, is a long-term relationship, meeting new people, a short-term casual relationship as well. That in terms of feeling less lonely is actually a key thing overall for respondents. And when we look at the different backgrounds and the personality traits, you can see that is a very strong key motivator at this moment in time, at least. So nearly 3 in 4 online daters have been spending more time on dating platforms during the pandemic. The next point is 67% of current online daters are less okay with being single at this time, and it just is made it particularly acute in the isolation aspect as well. Certainly, remember we did this research back in May, whereas obviously in the US and others, certainly in the UK, it was a very unique time period. Arguably, we're going to be going back into it as well. If social distancing stays in place for another few months, more than half of online daters say this will make them use dating platform apps more frequently as well. So it's highly correlated with the isolation, but there are behaviors that they're adopting and using that they're much more likely to continue in the future. So as I was saying, we've got a lot more research and insight as well. Please do get in touch. There are the details there. And to talk about this in much more detail, we've done so much other research on the impact of COVID. We've looked at it in terms of the impact on businesses who are vulnerable, likelihood of redundancies, restructuring, refinancing. We've also done a lot more work in terms of actually how to encourage the workforce to go back into the workplace, which the UK government is encouraging at the moment. But I think the best way, and hopefully this is useful to you guys as well, just to understand what is the situation now in an incredibly fast-changing environment to help with any decision-making as well there. But certainly with our work with Real Me as well, I think that the idea and the point of actually having a new revenue stream that feeds into the attitudes, behavior, and even the personalities of users is particularly appealing, and certainly I encourage you to get in touch to investigate further. So I have no idea how long I talk. Hopefully it wasn't over time, but thanks for the opportunity to present to you all.
This is Real Me. Do please take a look at the Real Me product. And next up, we have Blake, who's SVP at the Me Group, and we have John Murray, who is the godfather of reality TV. So I will let you and John have a speak. John, if we could get you up. Any second now. Great. Dan, if you could turn off your cam and mic, that'd be great. And I'm going to bow out as well, and I'll leave you to it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mark. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our keynote speaker. We have with us today really a true pioneer and trailblazer of reality television. He is a graduate of the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Journalism and formed Bunim Murray Productions alongside the late Mary Ellis Bunim, which has been inspiring, influencing, and entertaining audiences worldwide for more than 25 years, and is credited with inventing the modern-day reality TV genre. In 1991, John and Mary pitched their unprecedented idea for an unscripted drama series to MTV executives over breakfast. MTV bought the show before lunchtime, and the landmark success of Bunim Murray Productions was underway. The innovative series that merged Mary's experience in scripted daytime dramas with John's documentary and news expertise broke all the rules of television production. And clearly, rule-breaking works. John went on to create and serve as executive producer on countless more shows, including the first reality game show, MTV's Road Rules, in 1995, the first reality sitcom, The Simple Life, on E! in 2003, starring Paris Hilton, and the first reality soap opera, the Emmy Award-winning Starting Over. Boone & Murray's current programming includes Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which we all learned this week is sadly in its final season, Total Divas and Total Bellas on E!, The Challenge on MTV, Endless Summer on Snapchat, Ball in the Family on Facebook Watch, Ms. and Ms. on USA, Family or Fiancé are on OWN, Emily's Wonder Lab on Netflix, and Surviving R. Kelly on Lifetime. John currently serves as executive consultant, remaining at BMP in a creative capacity to develop series and documentary passion projects and oversee some of the company's longest running series. John has also won several Emmy Awards for Starting Over, Autism the Musical on HBO, and Born This Way on A&E. In 2012, Murray was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame and serves on their board, along with the Board of Respectability, a disability rights organization, and the Board of Trustees for Semester at Sea, a global education program. He also created the endowment that funds a Center for Documentary Journalism at the University of Missouri School of Journalism in Columbia, and is the first and finest journalism school in the world, I must say, but as an alum, I am very biased. John resides in Los Angeles, but is coming to us today from Cape Cod. Please give a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker, John Murray. Hi, John.
Boy, having listened to everybody so far, I'm worried that that was too much information for my dating profile.
Well, we're all going to swipe right. Don't worry. Well, John, we really appreciate you being here today. Can you take us back to really kind of where it all began in the early 90s and what it was like working on the first season of The Real World? Did you imagine it would essentially create an entire new television genre that has essentially been the new normal the world over since?
Yeah, I mean, we really didn't know as much as we thought we knew. We had this idea that if you put 7 people together from different backgrounds who normally wouldn't live together, you'd get conflict, and out of that conflict would come growth, and that growth would be our story arc. But we naively, I think we had 2 directors, a couple cameras, we naively thought at the same time, if they said they were going to go somewhere, they'd actually go there and not oversleep. So just the technology and the number of people to document everyday lives is tough. Our idea always was that we were going to do something that up to that time had been pretty much sort of documentary, where you tell the story that you find. We were creating the story in a way by choosing those 7 individuals. That choice that we made would determine potentially where story might go. And then we wanted to story edit it like a scripted show in terms of what's our A and B story. And of course, we really wanted romance. And we hoped we would have one that first season, but I think the closest we got to was a flirtation. And we had to give that flirtation a lot of help in the edit room between Eric, the good-looking model from New Jersey, and Julie, the young dancer from Alabama.
Yeah, that romance is clearly a central theme, and that's probably what made it such a success. And so many of the reality television series and documentaries have that as the central theme. Clearly, the reality TV format is becoming more democratized and accessible. We saw, today with Geoff's presentation as Reality TV 2.0, it certainly seems to be a lot more accessible now in a live streaming mobile first UGC format. Apps like The League, for example, they even have a tune-in time period between Sunday and Wednesday night. That's a speed dating session. And then the one-to-many environments like on East Meets East and across the Meet Group's 5-app portfolio. They have the games mentioned that are speed dating games like Next Date, Blind Date, Date Night. Is it fair to say that we really are entering into a new era of reality TV?
Well, I think we've certainly, there's a new platform, the platform that online dating uses, that allows more of a participation, more of an interaction, still gives you that voyeuristic experience that reality TV has. to linearly, where as the producer, I'm sort of figuring out sort of from all this stuff that I have, all this material, this is the stories I'm going to edit together and present to you. In what you're describing on these dating sites, you're sort of following the story you want to follow, and you're taking, it's not being as constructed. So in some ways that could be exciting. In other ways it might be less interesting, because, you know, all those hours that we take to put together the show, whether it's us or, you know, on A Real World or Mike Fleiss with The Bachelor, they're applying sort of what we've learned over hundreds of years, how you tell a story to engage people.
Yeah, and then that's the kind of format that is so different and new and interesting. And if you look at, I think what really makes it so engaging is the real-time interaction that you would have and with the streamer or the host, as it were, you know, as opposed to you know, message boards or Twitter or following up, or maybe Instagram with the cast members on a particular show. But I think with the one-to-many type of environment, you have that gifting that encourages a sort of reaction, and emotion is really what's driving it. I think that's often a mistake that some make, that want to liken this type of a format to a particular content category. Certainly we see that with shows, but when you see that with a particular talent, it's quite interesting because you're really getting that personality, and it would probably stand to reason that everyone in reality television that's on camera is on camera for a reason, because they have a personality and because they're easy on the eyes.
Yeah, and then the question is, are they being themselves, or are they giving you a performance of themselves? Paris Hilton, you know, in her new documentary talks about being on The Simple Life and how she was sort of giving the performance of what she thought her character was. So it's sort of interesting when you get to that. And of course, most people can spot phoniness. And so I would think that would be some kind of a way of protecting it from you know, whether the people watching said, this person is phony, I don't want to watch them anymore. They're just giving me an act.
And then if you look at it too, I think when you mentioned Paris Hilton, wasn't Kim Kardashian, that was her first, she was her assistant at the time on that show, on The Simple Life, right? Was that her first foray into TV?
Organized, yeah, she organized, she had a closet organizing business and organized Paris's closets.
That's right. That's right. I remember that. That was classic. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Now we're seeing too with the parent company of Tender, the Match Group. They just welcomed a new CEO, and he's formerly of CBS Interactive, Jim Lanzone. He laid much of the groundwork in the OTT SVOD space with CBS All Access. And you know, if you look at programs that they had one in particular called Swipe Night that preceded his tenure. It was a choose your own adventure type of series that added decisions that were made by the user to their profile, and then would match you with like-minded users that made those same kind of decisions. Then you look at the recent acquisition of the Meet Group by the German media powerhouse ProSieben. And then, you know, Warner Media recently installing a new CEO, formerly of Amazon and Hulu. Can you talk about the experience of producing shows for different formats, including linear television, Facebook Watch, Snapchat, and what it would take for legacy media to fully embrace maybe this next platform of live user-generated content?
Yeah, so far it seems like those legacy people, and I don't know, are we putting Netflix now and Facebook Watch and Amazon into legacy?
No, I wouldn't say that.
But they have not embraced interactive. You know, we did The Real World many years, and then we did the most recent season on Facebook Watch. And other than doing it in these little, you know, 7-minute episodes that would post, you know, daily or 4 or 5 times a week, and other than using more graphics and realizing we had to catch people and hook them within those first like minute and a half, or we wouldn't keep them. The rules for storytelling weren't that different. You know, and I think we've seen with, for instance, even with Netflix and Amazon and Snap, there hasn't been a big desire to do live. Most of them seem to be more interested in creating, you know, a content library that can then be sold around the world. So I don't know. I think that the dating platforms have an opportunity because they're presenting something, and they have the technology to present it in a way that I'm not sure those other folks have.
It certainly would lend itself to the voyeuristic aspect. I think that's really a very big central key component to reality television and to this live streaming environment that we're entering into. And Amazon is kind of dabbling in this with Twitch. They actually own Twitch and have for a while now, which is the live streaming gaming platform. But the fastest growing segment on Twitch is indeed their IRL or in real life section of Twitch. And what makes it so engaging is the fact that you actually have these virtual gifts that you're giving streamers to react in a way that really does show immediate appreciation and acknowledgement. And that's something I think that could be very well an addition to reality programming, as opposed to, say, watching it after the fact and not having that type of real-time engagement. And even with social media, it's the same. You look at it where you're giving someone a like or a comment, and even in dating apps, it's the same. You know, it may be hours or days before you hear back from someone if you've matched with them. So I think that's really what's an advantage to maybe the live streaming space. And I'd be interested to see, you know, if is it possible that The Bachelor could be, or shows like it in this type of a format that could actually be really real and live, as opposed to you know, pre-produced.
Yeah, I mean, there's been people have been pitching the idea for quite a while now, and no one's picked up on it. This idea of the viewers somehow having some kind of control or participation. You know, they're deciding who you're going to date, or where you're going to go, or what you're going to reveal about yourself. But so far we haven't seen that happen. There's just been a reluctance to do live, you know, and some of it is these are big companies, and you know, when you go live, you can't control, and most of these larger companies want a lot of control.
For sure, yeah. I think that's an advantage too for these apps, is that you know, in this type of an ecosystem, you don't have those type of regulators. You don't have the FCC. You're even more in a free and a freer environment than, say, even cable would be, because you don't have those constraints. I think that's an advantage. But if that would translate over into the lean back experience, that's always the case, right? The handheld versus the lean back living room TV experience. Making that transition has always, it's kind of like that we're entering into a time where you see what happened with the record industry and the iPhone and Apple and the way that digital, you know, music became digital, and it really reinvented it. And now, you know, the record industry and the music labels are doing very, very well. But there was a time where the transition was tough. So I think it's that transition that we're finding ourselves in now, that I would be curious to see if there's talk of that, or if you have familiarity with that from your point of view that you've seen in the industry.
Not really. You know, again, I think the dating apps are in a better place to innovate what that next form of storytelling might be, because you're set up for it. If it's going to involve interaction, if it's going to involve live, and certainly you're doing it in a lot of ways. There's something beyond you're doing that could work, that gives you some of the same experience of watching The Bachelor, or you know, where something is a well-told story, but at the same time includes that live and includes that interaction.
The final question I have to ask, having essentially invented this format, what's been the most rewarding part of your career over the decades that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with the real world, the idea was we wanted to show diversity. And I think Mary Alice and I were, sort of people who grew up in the 60s, and we had this liberal idea that if we get beyond the stereotypes, we'll realize that most of us actually have more in common than not in common. So in, the number of LGBTQ individuals on the real world and some of the other things we did, we hope we broke down some barriers and contributed, to a more open, more positive. And certainly, if you look at the generation that grew up on Real World, they were much more open to the idea of having a gay friend, or much more encouraging when of their friend to be out and who they were.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate very much, you joining us today and at this inaugural LTR.US conference. Thank you again for sharing so much of your journey with us and insights, I think, on what's next. It's a very exciting time, and for you to share that with us, it truly means a lot. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot from today's speakers. My head is spinning, so it's exciting.
That's a good thing. That's a great. You bet.
Thanks.
Back to you, Mark. Thanks.
If there's anyone you'd like to connect with in the industry, you'd mentioned before that dating could use some more insight. So, I mean, we've got a room full of folks who can give more insight. So if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. Right, we have got 5 minutes left before we get proverbially kicked out the room. Apparently we've got like a 2.5 hour session in this room. So join me for an experiment, if you will. Let's go back into the floor. We'll continue networking, and bear in mind at some stage we might get very rudely kicked out. So I'm not sure how that works because I've not used this before, but let's find out. So I'm going to go place you back onto the floor for some more networking. Thank you very much. The first LTR.